Now in this video I want to explore something that is perhaps one of the coolest things about 3D and Photoshop CS5 Extended, and that is the ability to create 3D text. And there's so many different things you can do with it. We're just going to touch on a couple of things here, just to hopefully to get you started, maybe experimenting with it yourself, and see what kind of cool things you can come up with. So we're going to start with a simple text element. I'm going to go and grab my text tool, set a text layer, and I'm just going to type the word play, because that's what we're going to do. We're just going to play around. So we'll go ahead and scale this up a little bit and go ahead and center it in my layout. Now, you can go ahead and turn a simple text layer into 3D text. Now, what I would encourage you to do, though, is when you're ready to convert to 3D, you're going to want to make a duplicate of your 3D layer, or of your text layer, rather, because when you create a 3D layer out of text, it's going to rasterize the text. It's no longer going to be editable. So if you've got a text element that you're not going to want to have to go back and recreate over and over, then it's a good idea to make a duplicate. Before I make my duplicate, I need to fix some formatting here. I'm actually going to close in the kerning between the L and the A so it fuses them together there. And a little adjustment here. There we go. Okay. So now we're ready. I'm going to go ahead and make a duplicate of that text layer. And I want to go ahead and fill it with white. I actually want to start with a white base. So let's actually invert a lot of our elements here. I'm going to invert my background. Let's just make that a black background. So just press Command I on the white background, inverts it to white. We'll go ahead and give our text a white fill. And let's go ahead and make it 3D. So you're going to go to the 3D menu and choose Repoussé and choose Text Layer. This is going to allow us to give our text, or put our text into 3D. So there it has gone ahead and created the 3D element. I can go ahead and maneuver this in 3D space. Very, very cool. It's just that easy to create 3D text in Photoshop now. This was virtually impossible. It pretty much was impossible before this version. You would have had to go in another application and perhaps use Illustrator's extrude feature, or even go in another 3D application altogether and then bring it into Photoshop. But to have this kind of control and creativity in Photoshop is a very, very big deal. Now the default extrusion of my text is a bit much, so we have to go in here in the Repoussé panel and adjust it a bit. Here inside the extrude section of the Repoussé panel is the depth setting. Now, curious how they've set this up. You would think it would be something different than just 1. Maybe it would be 100% or something like that, but 1 is the default setting. To make it a thinner extrusion, we're going to have to do it as a decimal. We'll do a 0.4 on this, and you can see the text gets a little bit thinner. So we've got all the other properties here inside the Repoussé panel that we can mess around with. We can put a bevel on our text. Let's go ahead and bring it back to the front here. Let's go ahead and put a 1 for the height and the width on the beveling here. Let's just zoom in so you can actually see that edge there. You can see that slight beveling on there. Now let's go a little bit higher so you can actually see what's really happening here. So we're getting a nice beveling on the text. You don't want to go too crazy with it, though, because depending on the angles of your letters, could get a little bit little interesting. Now over here we have our materials, and here's where you can apply colors or whatever to your 3D objects. So we've got different types of texture materials and surface properties. You can actually go and choose from a number of different categories of materials. Now these materials don't actually come with Photoshop. You have to go and download these, which is available. I'll show you just a minute. We got pretty much all the settings we're going to apply to this. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So to get them those materials I was talking about just a second ago, you go to the 3D panel, go down here to Browse 3D Content Online. And it's going to open up a browser panel. Let's go ahead and get that. There we go. And it's going to take me to a landing page where we can download a lot of this material. So there we are. The page is taking a while to load. Let's bear with me a moment here. So it's a landing page for the Photoshop 3D, and down here you got materials downloads. You can actually go down here, click this. You see where we've got the fabrics, glass, organics, things like that. Simply download them and install them into your Photoshop. So now I've got my text in 3D, and I can use my 3D tools here in the toolbar. I've got my Master 3D tool, the 3D Object Rotate tool, and rotate this around in 3D space. Pretty good. What I want to do now is create an element that I can reflect this text in, a surface, if you will. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new blank layer and fill it with black. And I'm going to apply a gradient to this layer. So zoom out here for a moment. I'm going to set my foreground to white. I'm going to use the foreground to transparent gradient here and just come in from the very top and just drag a gradient in. Now let's actually drop the opacity a little bit at around 60. Just to give this surface a little bit of variation there. There we go. So now I want to put this surface layer in 3D because I want my text to actually sit on top of it. Well, I don't need to extrude it like I did the text because I'm not going to see all the sides. So all I'm going to have to do is just make it a 3D postcard. So there we go. So now we've got our text and our 3D postcard right here. So we've got two 3D layers. In order for these to interact and reflect each other and, you know, interact in a way that you would expect in a 3D environment, I'm going to have to merge these two layers together. So I'm going to hold the Shift key down and select both layers. Go into the 3D menu and go down here and choose Merge 3D Layers. Now when you do this, things tend to shift around and might end up hiding elements behind certain things. In fact, in this case, the text is probably hiding behind this layer right here. If I shift this around, you can see. And if I slide it over, there's that text right there. It's right behind that plane. So let's go back a couple of steps here, back to where we were, and I'm going to need to change the position of just this surface layer because as you saw, both elements are parallel to each other, but I need them to be perpendicular to each other so that it can reflect it properly. So I'm going to go to the 3D panel, and here's where you can control all aspects of your 3D objects right inside here. Now because we have one 3D layer, we still have two 3D objects inside of there. And to manage those, we can go into the 3D mesh section. You've got 4 tabs at the top of the mesh, or the 3D panel here. The first one is the scene, which controls everything about your scene. The mesh, which controls individual meshes within a group. The materials, where you apply surface properties. And then the lights. So let's go to the mesh section real quick, and let's actually use the mesh tools here. Now the mesh tools here in the 3D panel are a little bit different than the tools over here in the toolbar. The toolbar 3D tools control the overall 3D object, and that's everything included in the one 3D layer, no matter how many different elements you've got merged together. The mesh tool will allow you to manipulate each one of those 3D objects individually that are contained within that 3D layer. So in this case, I'm just going to tilt forward that plane, and you'll notice as we get further down, the text is staying in place. So I'm going to go and open the options bar. I'm just going to make this at a definite negative 90 degrees, so it's right at perfect perpendicular to the text there. I can obviously need to slide that text forward, so I'm going to grab the 3D Mesh Slide tool, again grouped with the mesh tools here, and then the elements are content sensitive. As I put my cursor over that word play, it selects it, so I just click and drag down and it slides that text forward. Now I want to go ahead and slide that plane down. There we go. So now if I use the toolbar, the Master 3D Rotate tool, and rotate this object around, you can see there's my surface and the text still needs to come forward a little bit. So let's go ahead and grab that mesh tool once again, slide it forward. Just clicking and dragging down slides it forward for me. And obviously it's a little big, so we need to scale it a little bit. So we'll use the 3D Mesh Scale tool. Drop that down. Once again, slide it down. You can see when it breaks the plane is when you know you're right on top of it there. There we go. Now, we have no lights in our scenario here. We have to. This is why the text is not very, not showing much definition here, and that's because we have no lights. So we're going to go over here in the light section and just add a quick new spotlight. So you can see it's illuminating my object, but it's hard to manipulate the positioning of the spotlight because it's hard to see it. So they got a clever little tool in here. This first icon at the bottom of the 3D panel is the 3D axis. Well, that's the widget right there. But we're going to go ahead and turn on the 3D light. And there's our light. So now I want to reposition the light using the 3D light tools, which are located just below the 3D mesh tools here in the 3D panel. And they work the same way. I'm just going to grab the 3D light slide tool, slide it back in space, which is basically sliding it toward me, and then we'll just pan it up, and it illuminates my text. Now you can see the scope of the light is very narrow, and that has to do with the fall-off setting down here in the lower area of the panel. That I'm going to go ahead and increase to 75. And now it widens the scope. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move my object around. Now the curious thing is when I move my object around, you can see that the light does not move. And in many cases that might be okay. But if you wanted to, if you've got your light in the perfect positioning, and you don't want to change it, but you do want to change the angle of view that you're looking at your object, you're not going to want to manipulate the 3D object, but rather the 3D camera right inside here. But before I do that, I'm actually going to need to scale up that plane right there because surface area is a little smaller. There we go. So again, like I said, we're going to use the camera tool and rotate our object around, and notice the light moves with it. So we're getting a much more interesting look here. So now, to give us a finished look, I'm going to go into my materials section right here and go down in the list right here. We've got layer 1, which is the surface that we created, and all these other ones are the different meshes of our text. We've got the front face, we've got the beveling, the extrusion, which is the sides, and then the back faces as well. But we want to select the layer 1 and increase the reflection property to 50. Now, we don't see a reflection right now because the reflection is something you have to render when you are ready to see the effect. And to do that, we'll click on that first tab in the 3D panel right here. Once again, select Scene at the top of the list, and then go down here to the Quality menu and choose Ray Trace Draft. And it's going to do a progressive render of our elements, and then it will create the reflections, giving us a nice, clean look to it. Now I can see right away that the reflection is a bit more opaque than I want it to be. That's no problem. We'll just drop it down to 25. It's going to do a re-render, and now we've got it dropped down in opacity. Probably could even drop it down even further to make it a little bit more faint in that surface. There we go. That's more what I'm looking for. Now, I've got the text sitting flush on the surface, but what if I wanted to maybe angle it a little bit, give it a little bit more interest to it? Well, that's no problem. We'll go into the mesh section, select the play, and we'll just slide that element up, perhaps, and maybe just change the angle slightly. And once it does a re-render, it's going to re-render it, and it's going to generate the reflection based on its new positioning. And there we have cool 3D text reflecting in true 3D space. Not to mention it's generating the shadow on that surface as well. So if we've got that, maybe I want to change my camera angle once again. Maybe get a different angle of view there. And let's go ahead and pan this up just a little bit there. Maybe you're like that. All different cool things you can do once you have your 3D elements in place. And this is the beauty of 3D, is that once these things are in play, you can just change your angle to get a completely different design altogether. So true, there's a little bit of work on the front end, but once you get there, you'll have all the freedom in the world to do whatever you want. Now, one last thing though, maybe we're looking at this and maybe I decide, well, I don't like the text white anymore. So just go in here into the layers, and in the play, you've got two properties, one for the front and back face and then one for the extrusion. We'll just go in here, lock the transparency, opens it up like a smart object, give it a color fill, close it, save the changes, and it will update right inside of there. In fact, that looks pretty cool. I'm just going to leave it like that without changing the side faces. But you can see the different ways you can manipulate 3D text, or 3D or turning text into 3D and then putting it in an environment like this and having a lot of fun with reflections and shadows and lights, doing all kinds of very cool effects.